Okay, let's pick up where we left off. Sorry about the sometimes the abrupt ending of these recordings, but I keep looking at the time, and the time goes by faster than I think. Anyway, we were talking about the cells that uh, make up the nature of bone. Certainly with osteocytes, I think I gave them not quite as much kudos as I should. I kind of glossed over what they do. What they do is they create this matrix around themselves and maintain it. So they're still able to secrete, they're still able to secrete and to maintain the area just around them. They can't make new bone from cartilage like an osteoblast can, but they can maintain where they live. So that in that way, they are still somewhat related to where they came from, the osteoblast, but not quite the same cell. And that's kind of the metabolic activities that the osteocyte are doing. With regard to the osteoblast, my information was accurate to the point where I wanted it to be accurate, and that is the osteoblast builds around itself when it has itself walled in. It's in a lacuna, have canaliculi, then it becomes an osteocyte because it no longer does the building job. The interesting thing about an osteocyte, if in fact it gets out of the lacuna, if it's no longer surrounded by the matrix, it actually can revert back in to become an osteoblast, which is kind of an interesting thing. Osteogenic cells, as I said, these are the stem cells. They're the precursor cells for osteoblasts. Then, of course, then osteoblasts become osteocytes. You find these in the endosteum, so in the internal portion of the long bone, and also at the periosteum, so either sides of the long bone if you cut the bone in a cross section. And then the osteoclasts, we were kind of talking about the osteoclasts. They are related to monocytes and macrophages. So they kind of come from a different cell than the osteogenic cell. Think of, I mean, you don't know that much about monocytes and macrophages, but they're actually what we consider eater cells, so phagocytic cells. So osteoclasts kind of eat bone, chip away the bone. They'll chip away the bone so the bone can grow in diameter, and they'll chip away the bone so the bone can be remodeled, can be shaped in a certain in a way that genetically we associate with human beings. And also, if calcium or these minerals that are being stored on bone are needed, osteoclasts can chip them away to provide the calcium for the bloodstream. A little bit more about the osteocyte, but not too much more. It's just another image that you have in your book, which is nice. It lies within the dense matrix, which the dense matrix is you can see that it's kind of the tan color on here. That's going to be calcium salts as well as other minerals. And in the lacuna, you have this canaliculi for the passageway for blood vessels and site of exchange. Bone itself is dense, supportive connective tissue with specialized cells. One other thing I want to say, I keep talking about the calcium salts and the matrix. Well, the matrix is very, very strong but brittle. The thing that makes bone its unique property is all of these collagen fibers. So you have a tremendous amount of collagen fibers that this matrix is built in, and those collagen fibers give bone its flexibility so that when you fall, if you hopefully you don't fall, but if you fall, you don't shatter a bone. Like you can think of, and maybe this might be an old-fashioned thing, you can think of something called bone china, which actually has been affected. It's not, it does come from bone, been affected, but if you drop a piece of bone china, it shatters all over the place. And again, it's not so much because the bone it came from when it was in the animal it was in would have shattered, but it's what happens to the bone. But it gives you a picture of what bone would be like if you didn't have these collagen fibers. And then again, just kind of quickly, your book talks about and gives you more pictures of the osteoblast. Immature bones secrete compounds that give rise to the bone tissue itself, so osteogenesis. And an osteoid is a matrix that osteoblast produced. It produces, but it's not calcified yet. It's the precursor to the calcified area that osteoblast is building around itself. And then when that does surround the osteoblast, it becomes an osteocyte. The osteoblast becomes an osteocyte. And then you have osteogenic cells. They're the precursor cells, also called mesenchymal stem cells. And they are in the endosteum, so within, and also the periosteum, so around the outside. And then osteoclasts, again, these are the builder cells. They derive from cells that produce macrophages. Macrophages are your mass eaters. There you see that word there. That's a good thing. With regard to homeostasis, there is something new on this particular slide. Bone is constantly being broken down and built up again. It just is always going on. So you're constantly repairing and regenerating and renewing bone. So it's constantly being recycled. And you have to have a balance. So you have to be building it as much as you're breaking it down. If one or the other is out of whack, so if you're doing one more than the other, the bone is either going to become weak, and that's pretty easy to understand, or the bone is going to become too strong. And the problem with bones that are too strong or too heavy, the body isn't designed for that particular bone weight. Now you can have a little bit of weight on there, but if you have bones that are too strong or too heavy, your muscles aren't going to be able to function. You aren't going to be able to function. So it is a balancing act between the remodeling and the rebuilding of bone. Exercise, and we talk about this a couple of times, particularly weight-bearing exercise is excellent with regard to causing osteoblasts to build bone, and causing osteoblasts to build bone in areas of needed, so area where you know you have stress. You have stress because you're actually exercising in weight-bearing ways, and so that exercise actually needs to start early and be carried out throughout your entire life. So it isn't something where you start exercising when you see bone loss. You want to have an exercise program that goes on throughout your whole life. One more reason why exercise is excellent, very good for you. And then this is kind of a new topic. We've looked at this, we haven't talked about it yet. And that's the osteon, which is the basic unit of compact bone. Osteocytes are arranged in concentric lamina around a central canal. And so we'll stop and we'll look at the picture here. You have, this is what do I want to say? This is a microscopic picture. We have another picture on the next one that might even be a little clearer. But that central canal is going to be where you have a blood vessel. That blood vessel is going to bring only that osteon's only going to be as big as that central canal can feed nutrients to all of the cells that are living in that particular osteon. Now, this particular this image, you have these kind of dark color. Actually, it's pointing to them. It's pointing to the lacuna. So if you see on the left side, you see the word lacuna, L-A-C-U-N-A-E. those are those little black dashes, and that's where the osteocyte is in existence. That's where there's living bone cells. And the matrix is in between, and you can see these lines that look like they are the canaliculi. And so that particular vessel in that central canal is able to feed the nutrients for this entire osteon, and that's how big the osteon can become. And a bone grows in these concentric circles because that is a much stronger arrangement. They're wrapped around the long bone, and it binds them together. And let's move on to the next picture because I think it shows it a little bit better. This is the one that if you have lab on campus, you can see this in lab, and you can see where you have in your central canal, you have your artery and vein, so vascularization. You have your lacuna, and your lamina. Your lamina are the concentric rings that I keep calling concentric rings instead of lamina. And then you have your area between, and you have the outside of this whole bone, which is the periosteum, which is the fibrous connective tissue. And this is the arrangement. Each of the circles that you see on this is considered an osteon, is considered the functional unit of the bone. So this is the portion of the bone that's that little city, I guess, of that bone. You can think of it that way, and that's how compact bone grows constantly, and also spongy bone, but in a little bit different way, a different arrangement or different look with regard to spongy bone. And so you have the central canal, and then you have these perforating canals also. Every single area in this bone you have living cell. It may only be about 2%, but every single area of this bone you have living cell. So that means that every single area of this bone tissue has to have blood flow to it, and that's what this design does. It creates a very strong material, but also a living material, a material that is able to function and take care of itself, and also provide you with a very important aspect of muscle contraction called calcium and other minerals. Structure of spongy bone, we might have to leave it here. This will probably be the last thing we can talk about on this one. Still has that lamina. You still have the endosteum, so you have some very similar arrangement with regard to spongy bone. And remember, spongy bone is such that because you have the space in between, we're going to have the marrow. It doesn't have those concentric rings in the form of osteons. But what you have is an open network where you have the matrix forming this open network. You don't have blood vessels in the center, but the space between is filled with a marrow that has a vascularization to it. So the trabeculae can only get as big as the vascularization in the marrow that's interspersed amongst this trabeculae can feed it. Yellow marrow in some bones, and spongy bone holds yellow marrow, which is thought to store fat. So you have red marrow and spongy bones in certain parts of the adult. Now in the infant or the newborn, you have spongy bone almost all the way through the whole infant. That spongy bone then is remodeling into compact bone, but in the adult, you only have spongy bone in certain areas in terms of the design. Spongy bone again is the housing of bone marrow.